morning. I hope you're drying out. It's been a couple of weeks since the dreadful floods that have devastated the east coast again of Australia. This picture up here is of the Hawkesbury River, a breakaway up near Freeman's Reach. That was all flooded last week. The devastating floods, last year the bushfires, and in between COVID-19, which continues. These kinds of events and experiences highlight the struggle, the pain, the suffering, the vulnerability of life in our world against forces that are bigger than we are. There's been the loss of life, for some people, loss of everything they own, loss of hope, incredible stress, pain and difficulty. It's been a tough time. For many of us, we roll on and life continues on. We experience some of this vicariously. The lockdown's been difficult last year. We've worn masks, we've been isolated, a whole lot of exclusions, some in our communities and some we've known who have been sick. But by and large, compared to other parts of the world, we've been relatively fortunate. Some good responses from our leaders and our government, levels of government. I received a letter last week, an email that went out to a number of people, many people across the world, from a colleague and friend who lives in Edinburgh, in Scotland. And Peter and his wife Dorothy came out and did some work in our part of the world, in Western Sydney, with our churches a number of years ago now. And they brought a great deal of wisdom and experience. Peter had been a warden in the Iona community in Scotland for a number of years. But he and Dorothy, she was a pathologist, had done a lot of work in the developing world, across the world, in a number of places over the years, particularly amongst impoverished communities and struggling peoples. Very inspirational people and very wise, and we learn a lot. Anyway, Dorothy died a few years ago quite suddenly, and Peter himself, not long after that, was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a cancer of the bone marrow that's incurable but treatable, and he's been cared for in the last 5 years and relatively healthy. He was warned last year that COVID-19 would be very difficult for him if he succumbed to the illness. And he shielded himself and protected himself very well for the year, but then last month he discovered he was positive. And what ensued was a number of weeks in hospital. He was on the verge of death at times. It was very serious. And he was kept alive with the various drugs and medications and breathing apparatus that he required to help him breathe. And as he was coming out of it a little bit and more conscious, he was lying there with the oxygen mask on, helping him to breathe and getting that vital oxygen into his body. And he thought of a prayer that was a fairly common prayer in their Iona community, daily prayer. Lord, give us today what is essential for life. Something like that. And as he's lying there, helpless and powerless, with this mask helping him to breathe, he thought, God, the one thing I need is breath. To be able to breathe. And he reflects on how this simple thing that we take for granted, breath, is so precious and vital. And how he was unable to do it on his own. He was close to death. Without the intervention of medicine, Peter would not be with us. And he laments that in many parts of the world they don't have access to what he had. It's these experiences of life and death, of struggle and suffering, that Good Friday is about. And as we come to this Easter weekend, and we travel, we journey through Good Friday, which is what we must do before we can get to Easter Day. we recognise the pain and the struggle of life. The suffering that is part and parcel of being alive. Sometimes that suffering comes at the hands of others, and sometimes it's just part of where life is, the grief and loss that we all experience. For Jesus, in his ministry and teaching, he talks about the dying, rising life, and that all of life and the journey through life is a constant experience of dying and rising, of letting go in order to be reborn and renewed. I've spoken a number of times of 12 steps programs and people who have gone through those, and their understanding, their awareness that they have to come to of letting go, of dying to the need, the addiction, whatever it is, in order to be reborn, to live again. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been a collaborative art exhibition in Northmead Creative and Performing Arts High School. It's a collaboration between the school and Northmead Uniting Church, and it's been going for several years now. And each year, Doug Pennell and his co-curators, Chris Orquette and Jennifer Little, approach 15 significant artists, Australian artists, and they each produce one of the Stations of the Cross, the traditional Stations of the Cross. And it's a journey through suffering, crisis, through life and death, following the journey of Jesus, the Via Dolorosa, that last journey from being sentenced to death through to crucifixion. And they add the 15th, which is resurrection. And as I journey each year, I'm drawn into the bigger picture of life and death and living and dying, of Jesus' journey, and what this journey in the cross holds and means, the struggle and the pain. This year there are some beautiful artworks once again. The first one, Jesus is Condemned to Die, is by Harry Fisher. It's a sculpture that's quite simple. Well, it looks simple. I'm sure it's quite complex, but I look at it and I wonder, what does it like to be sentenced to death? What is it like for those people on death row? What is it like for those people we've known in Bali prisons, caught trafficking drugs and sentenced to death? What's it like for people who receive a diagnosis that there is no treatment? There's nothing we can do. You will die. But in a sense, it's what we all confront and face. And in that moment in Jerusalem, Jesus knows that he's going to die. He's known it all along in some ways, for some time. He travels there knowing that making a stand against the powers and principalities of the world, the Roman Empire, the leaders of his own nation, is going to bring him face to face with death. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who stood as one of those who stood against Hitler, knew his life would be threatened if not, and he was killed. Oscar Romero, the great Archbishop in El Salvador, knew that he would die because the powers of that nation that he spoke out against would take his life. Many others. And as I journeyed through, Doug Pennell has got his own work in this exhibition. It's this strange station, number 6, Veronica Wipes Jesus' Face. And it's that sense of wiping the face of the one who is carrying his cross to his death, and the imprint, the the sweat, the blood, the tears are embedded into this cloth, and they hold and contain the pain of Jesus. And she, in her sense, reaches out and in her own way holds his pain, his being, his life. And something of her own struggle is part of that. Because as we enter into this journey of Jesus, we enter deeply into our own journey, our own struggle with life and death. There's many other works. Jesus falling first, second and third times. There's one, Matthew. Matthew is from Studio A. It's an art studio for people with intellectual disabilities. And when he was asked to do Jesus Falls for a second time, this is what he painted. And it's the Easter Bunny, and the Easter Bunny's bitten by a dog. And so he goes and gets a band-aid to be put on it, to be healed. It's a simple storyline, but a profound story of healing and wholeness, of struggle and life and death. And Matthew, in his very simple way, unlocks that for us. There's other pictures of Jesus falling and being crushed, but other people fall with him. There's many other images. Chris Orquette, the art teacher from the high school, who is a wonderful artist, has an image where it's rice paper, very thin, and there's thorns, orange tree thorns, bush thorns, and the rice paper is attached to the thorns come through, and it's standing there. For me, it shows the vulnerability of life, vulnerability and struggle, but it also shows, when I stood close, it's lit up, my image was reflected onto that, and it was quite a confronting picture that I'm there on the rice paper, that this is me, that I enter into the story of Jesus' struggle, his death, his suffering. And what is it in me that needs to die in order to live again? In a similar way, the work of Jennifer Little, is an extraordinary. It's Simon. It's an earlier station where Simon helps Jesus carry his cross, and she's painted various images of Simon and Jesus. The one who can't carry his cross is helped by another, and she reflects on the abuse that she's experienced in her life, both physical and as an artist, trying to find her way. And of those who have carried her father's image finds its way there. And as I stood looking at Jenny's work, again, I stood in one place and my image was on it. And I found myself entering into that artwork, that who am I? Am I the one who is struggling to carry my cross? Or am I the one who may be able to help another carry theirs? Maybe it's a bit of both. This is Good Friday, and it's a day we recognise the death of Jesus and what it means in the big scheme of things and in the small realities of our lives. Jesus gives his life for the sake of God's reign. The powers and principalities of the world collapse in on him and take him out. But that's not the end of the story. But in hearing this story, in engaging it, in entering into it, we wrestle with our own mortality, our own struggles, our own suffering. And it's at that point we recognize our own vulnerability and powerlessness, and that we need the salvation of God, which ironically is one of the early steps in the 12-step program. We can't do it alone. We need the higher power, the God at the heart of all things, who loves us, to hold us and sustain us. This is Good Friday. It's not the end of the story. Join us for the next part.